Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Capstone Orientation and Secrets Exposed event. My name is Dawn Savage. I'm one of 3 grad advisors here in the School of Public Affairs, along with Ben Arnold, Scott Steinbrecher, and our faculty. Just want to congratulate you. You're in the home stretch of completing your degree. So this event is offered twice a year to give students a strong foundation going into their capstone project. Hopefully everyone had a chance to watch their program video in Canvas. So for MPA students, you should have watched Dr. Martel's video, and for MCJ students, you should have watched Dr. Govers. We have a pretty full agenda for you this evening. Before we begin, just wanted to quickly talk through a few housekeeping items. First off, please mute yourselves just to avoid or minimize background noise. For students, you are free to leave your camera on or off. We're expecting 70+ participants tonight, so completely up to you. If you encounter any tech issues during the event, please use the chat feature for tech support. We'll also be utilizing that chat feature for questions that arise during our presentations. So we'll be monitoring that to get you the information that you need. Lastly, please have your full name visible on your account. That's for proof of attendance, as this is a mandatory event. So as a reminder, here's our agenda for this evening. We may go all the way through to 6:20 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So now what I want to do, I want to introduce Joan Fishburne. Joan is our Career Services and Alumni Relations Specialist. She has some great information for you and tips to share on finding a capstone client. Joan, take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joan Fishburne. I am, obviously having issues getting this to show correctly. Ellen?
I would just go straight in the bottom, the little PowerPoint presenting icon. Try that.
Sorry, there. Oh, it's been a long day. It's a Friday. Hi, everybody. My name is Joan Fishburne. I'm the Alumni Relations and Career Services Manager at SPA. I've had the pleasure of working with some of you and hope to get to know some more of you through this process. I just want to talk a little bit about finding your capstone client. For some students, this is a stress point. It is something they dwell on and think about. Other students have it all under control. They already have somebody identified. If that is you, you can still pay attention. You never know what might happen with your proposed client between now and February. And I'm always here to help support all students if they need to find a client, no matter if it is tomorrow or January 30th. So that is part of my role, is here to provide that interface between capstone clients and students. So I just want to dive in and thinking a little bit about kind of your philosophy on how you're going to look for a client. Obviously, this is a big project. It's a big part of your academic course load here at SPA, and there is the primary purpose, right, of doing this project, right? It is to demonstrate and put into practice everything you have learned throughout your time here, completing your MPA or your MCJ or both. And it is really an opportunity to take everything you've learned in the classroom and put it into practice for an organization that needs some help completing a certain project that either they don't have the capacity for or the time for. And they really do rely a lot on our students to provide that extra support. And the clients are incredibly grateful for the help that you all will give them. But thinking about your primary goal, I often get students who come and say, I don't really care, I just need a client, I need any project. Ideally, that is not the way you would approach this. You would approach it as a way to, demonstrate the competency of what you've learned and be able to apply it into what you're thinking about going into or the field that you're already in. So we really want to stick, I don't want you to go too far afield from what your career goals are when you're thinking about trying to find your client. But there are some secondary goals to think about, and we always like to talk about the other kind of the benefits of doing the Capstone project, right? So it is a great opportunity to widen your professional network. You may get a chance to meet with, work with other people outside your organization or in a new field that you're hoping to move into. It is definitely an opportunity for you to expand your portfolio of work. We do have students who will use their Capstone project as a writing sample, proof of your ability to collect and analyze data. So it is a really good opportunity, a tangible opportunity, something you can take with you into the job search process to demonstrate your competency in the field. It can also be an opportunity to support an organization that you care about. I know a lot of our students not only work in serving the public, but they also volunteer or support organizations in other ways. Your Capstone project can actually be a third way or a different way to give that tangible feedback to an organization that you're involved with. And then ideally, if you're one of those people who are using the Capstone project to enter a new field or advance in your current field, if you have a great client, you demonstrate a good working relationship, you have great results, they can see your work ethic and your capacity. We do have students that receive job offers from their Capstone clients. So when you're thinking about, out of all the people out there, about how you're going to narrow down who you want to work with, we have some resources for you. I think Dawn has shared the orientation booklet. There's a very small sample of projects in there. That is just the few that have already come in. I will be collecting projects throughout the semester, and I literally get projects from now really up until the start of the semester. So projects will still keep coming in. That doesn't mean you should wait, but don't panic if you're not seeing 30 projects listed now. They will continue to come in, especially as we move through the fall semester. So what I will do with the information that's currently in the booklet, I transition that into a Word doc, and I will put it into the student resources section on Canvas that talks about the Capstone. And so the list will live there every time someone comes in, not every time, probably once a week. I go through and update it, swap out the old file for the new file. So you can keep checking back there to see when things have been added, and just to see if there's anything else that has been added that kind of piques your interest. Hopefully you all read the career newsletter from top to bottom that comes out every week. I'm trying to do a better job of putting the Capstone projects in there, and that would be just the new ones. So they won't all be listed every week, but the new ones that come in, I will put a section in the newsletter. So we'll just highlight which organizations those are, and then you'll have to go into the Capstone, the Canvas site the student resources site on Canvas to find a description of the project and the contact information for the client. Occasionally we will use Handshake, and I have found projects on Handshake. To be honest, there's not a ton there, but there are some. And so it's not, if you're on there anyway, looking around, you actually can sort by project and find some projects on Handshake. In full disclosure, those are not necessarily ones that we have worked with, and I use the word vetted very loosely. They're not people that we have reached out to and partnered with. They're people who have found Handshake and use it as a resource to connect with students. But there have been some good projects on there. I've had students bring projects to me and say, hey, I found this on Handshake. What do you think? And they've worked out fine. So it is an option out there for you. So those are sort of all your tangible resources. You also have your faculty. So faculty that you've taken classes with, developed a great working relationship, faculty who understand what your career goals are. They have a huge network. Most of the faculty have been there far longer than I have. They know the alumni. They have a much broader understanding of the alumni, and they still have connections with people who keep in contact with them. So, if you have those faculty members that you've been working with, ask them if they have connections that you might reach out to see if there's a capstone project that maybe you can come up with one of our partners. I mentioned earlier organizations that you've been involved with. So anyone that you've raised money for or volunteered for or just think is really interesting and like the work that they do, reach out to them directly. Sometimes they don't always have the capacity to reach out to us because they're busy doing their work. But if you were to reach out to them and to say, I really admire the work that you're doing, I'd love to support you. I have to do this project. And is there is there a project that you have in mind that I could help you with? So you can be a little bit proactive with an organization you're already familiar with. This one, the next one, there's a little bit of a caveat. Your current employer can potentially be an option for you to do your capstone with. We do have some restrictions around that. Todd may address that a little bit more fully later, but in general, you can't do your project. Your immediate supervisor or anybody that you supervise cannot be your client. It has to be kind of outside your chain of command. It's a lot easier if you're working for a large organization or a larger organization where there might be different divisions, departments. That gets to be a little bit tougher if you're working for a very small nonprofit and there's only 3 of you on staff. So it is possible, but there are some restrictions around it. If you have questions about the restrictions or questions about, I'm kind of thinking about this, does this work? You can reach out to me, you can reach out to Paul, you can reach out to Todd, or you can reach out to your capstone instructor. And then finally, as I mentioned, I am also a resource for you. So what I do is I can meet with students individually, hear about what you're thinking about for your project, consult our alumni database, our partner organization database to see if there's somebody who matches up with your area of interest. I can look at our past capstone clients and see if we have any previous clients who might be in your area who possibly just didn't submit a project so far this semester, or they've had some staff turnover and the new person doesn't really understand about the project. But if we have past capstone clients, I'm always happy to reach out to them on your behalf. I can reach out to our alumni, community partners. I am very happy to make a cold call, send a cold email. If you're talking to someone and you're thinking about, you're introducing this idea of a project to them, they don't really understand what their role would be or what they'd be responsible for. You can always connect them with me directly, and I'm happy to have those direct conversations with a potential client for you. I always like to say one thing I don't do is I don't approve projects. You have to talk to your capstone, make sure that you've, once you have your project, at least outlined. And if you have questions about if you're on the right track, please take those questions to your capstone instructor. And then finally, just some pieces of advice, some things I've learned from working with students over the past few years, just to make your client search a little bit easier. The first one is key. Remember that this is a client-driven project. You should not be coming up with a project that you're really interested in and then trying to shop around for a client who's going to support that project. We do want this project to be meaningful and impactful for the client. And while your interest may pique their interest, it's not necessarily something that's kind of top of mind for them and is really going to impact their work. So remember that it is a client-driven project. I always say start early, and then I worry that people are starting too early, or people get frantic because they think they should be starting early. I would say start keeping an ear open, keeping an eye out for people that might be speaking in your class, for people that you might meet at a networking event through your job. Like, be thinking about it, but don't stress over it yet. But also please don't wait till the day before classes start, because that becomes a bigger issue. So start early-ish. Go into the process with an open mind. I know a lot of you have a very clear idea of what you want to get out of the project, the kind of project you want to work on. Sometimes your first choice doesn't work out, and that's fine. I've actually had students who say, well, I did this project. It was in my field. I wasn't super interested in it, but I needed a project and it was available. So I took it and I really had a great experience, and I really worked, it was a really great working relationship with the client. I learned a ton. It may not still be the area that I want to go into, but I took so much out of that experience. So, have an open mind. Don't necessarily get focused in on one client, and to the extent that you're ignoring other opportunities. Also try to test your client communication. What you don't want to have happen is getting into the project and then having a client be unresponsive. And that can happen for all sorts of reasons. It's not necessarily that they're not interested in working with you, but life happens. We know the work world has been in turmoil and people are changing positions. So there's all kinds of reasons why a client could have a communication issue with you. But you don't want that to be a real problem once you get into your project. So do a few test emails. If you are having no response from a client, it just might not be a good time for that client. It might be a good indication for you to maybe look elsewhere. And then that brings me to the last one, which is don't be afraid to start over. If you have found a project, if you think it's great, and then something happens, and that something could be all sorts of things, don't be afraid to start over, even if we're getting close to the start of the semester. That is typically when I really do work a little bit more closely with students one-on-one, is as we're getting closer to the semester. And like I said, things happen. Your client may have to pull out for some reason. You may just not have a great feeling that this project is going to go the way you want. Don't be afraid to start over. There are professional ways to tell the client, that the more we've talked about the project, it really isn't aligned with my professional goals. Thank you very much for your time and your partnership. But I'm going to, head in a different direction. So don't feel like you're locked in once you have had that initial conversations with clients. I think that is it. I seem to have lost my question slide. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you don't have questions yet, I will be hanging out and I'll be answering in the chat. There was a question, where in Canvas is the list of available capstone projects for spring 2023? It is not up yet. I think I still actually haven't taken down the one yet for fall 2022. It will be up sometime next week is where that will live. And it's in the student resources section in Canvas. All students should have access to that. If you don't, please reach out to Dawn and she can help you get access to it. But I think Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all enrolled students are automatically given access to that student resources tile in Canvas.
So they actually have to self-enroll in it. It's part of our next steps after admissions on our website. Please email me if you need instructions on that so I can get you connected.
Great, thanks, Dawn. There's a question in the chat about your project, if you're doing a concentration and your project should be related to your concentration, and the answer to that is yes. Oh, great question. There's another question about, is there something you can hand out to clients? Yes, we actually have, I'll find it during the next section. We have a link, we have a brochure. It's available as a hard copy, so you're welcome if you're in the Denver area to stop by and pick some up if you want to. Otherwise, you can just provide a potential client with a link to our website and they can view the brochure online. Start early. So yeah, more specific about starting early. I would say don't panic, but start looking, October feels good. October, November, I mean, then you get into the holidays and people get a little bit busy. So I would say start in October, start putting some feelers out. Always start first with the list. I mean, that's my biggest piece of advice. Like the list exists because those are actual projects that people have ready to go. So start with the list. And if you're not seeing anything there, then cast your net a little bit wider. And yeah, I would start doing that in October. There is no geographic restriction. Client does not have to be here in Denver or Colorado. People often find it helpful, especially if you are wanting to use this as a way to network or possibly find a position, to find a local client, but it's not a restriction. I mean, Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, but the client does not have to be, you don't have to be in the same physical location as your client. Especially great if you want to move to a new place.
Yeah, that's correct. I've had students with clients in the middle of the South Pacific on a small island, and I mean, it can be anywhere. So don't limit yourself. You just want to make sure that you're able to communicate with them effectively, despite them not being in the same location as you.
Yeah, we actually had a student, I think when I first started, who took a job, I think in Nigeria. So her client was here, but she was no longer here. And it worked out fine. Todd, can you answer the next one? So if someone's in a nonprofit concentration but wants to do capstone with a government office that collaborates heavily with nonprofits, that feels to me like that is okay, but I'm gonna let you clear that.
Yeah, great question. I will say that in that case, you would just reach out to your concentration director and ask them and kind of make the case, right, for how this is connected to the concentration. And in my experience as a concentration director, those tend to be approved because we want you to do a capstone that gets you to whatever professional goal you have. And so if there's a connection that maybe isn't as prominent as the requirement sounds like, we still tend to approve those if it's going to help you with your professional goals.
Question: you do not need to go if there's a project in the document, the project list, you don't need to go through me. You can reach out to them directly. All the names are hyperlinked with the contact's email address and their phone numbers in the document as well. So you can absolutely go ahead and reach out to them directly, or just let them know that you're a student at CU Denver School of Public Affairs, you saw their project on the list, and you want to talk with them about possibly working with them.
And Joan, I see questions popping up, but
yes.
I know the next part of the presentation might answer some questions.
Okay.
And I don't know how you want to deal with kind of more specific, case by case questions. So I'll leave that up to you, whether we present and then take more questions or continue to answer questions now.
Why don't you go ahead with your you're up next to your presentation, and I think that will answer some of these questions. And then if those questions don't get answered, I will also be here and I can answer questions in the chat.
Yeah, and I'll say we can also stick around at the end. Every capstone is unique, and often the questions are really tailored right to kind of your personal circumstances. So we can definitely try to address some of those at the end of the session as well, if you have them.
Yep. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and let you take it away.
All right. Okay, hopefully that looks all right to everyone. Great. Well, yeah, first of all, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Todd Ely. I'm on the faculty, and I stepped into the role of MPA Program Director this summer. I see lots of familiar names and faces on the Zoom, and so I apologize if everyone's having flashbacks to public budgeting and finance remote classes. Time has flown since then, but welcome everyone. And as someone who's taught Capstone quite a few times, and I looked today, I think I've been a second reader on 80 or 90 of them since I got here. So I love the capstone. I think it's a really special experience. And really, it's one of the most rewarding times, I think for both the student and faculty in our program. You'll put a lot of work in, but the reward is really great at the end of the semester to kind of see, what you've achieved and how you've helped your clients. So with that, I'm providing an overview. I will mention that in a couple spots, it's MPA specific and might not translate to the MCJ program, but feel free to follow up, with any of those discrepancies. And in general, things are very similar. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. And as mentioned before, we can take more questions after this. So, today I was just reflecting on the term capstone. And so I did look up the definition officially because we never actually say what it is. And so, the first definition was this large flat stone forming a roof over the chamber of a megalithic tomb, which, who knew? And so I just want to say that's not the capstone we're talking about here, but you can kind of see where this word evolved, right? And kind of how it got to where it is, the way we're using it. So another one was that, the capstone is kind of the high point or crowning achievement. Like, this is the best thing I've done in my career. And the reality is, we know you're going to go on and do amazing things in your career beyond the capstone. So it's not really that for us either, but this third definition really captures it for me. And it really is the notion that the capstone is a culminating, right, and integrative experience of an educational program, right? So this is a chance for you to really kind of show what you've learned, demonstrate, a whole set of skills and competency, and really, do that in a way that's really advancing your professional interests, right? But also serving an organization that you care about. So with that, I will go through the course goals. And some of this might be a little repetitive from the videos you've already watched, but if there's one thing we know about Capstone, it's always good to reinforce information and make sure everyone's on the same page. So the goals of the Capstone, as the definition suggested, right, is really to bridge your course of study to the practical experience. And Joan mentioned this as well. She also mentioned, right, that you can use the capstone to leverage your career and our professional goals. So that's a really, key goal of the capstone, right? How do you position yourself for the career that you want to have? The third one, right, I start getting a little more onto the academic side, but also professional side. You do get to demonstrate, right, specific knowledge, concepts, and principles from your program. And then, thinking critically, this is always my favorite, and I think probably the most important for the capstone, but also writing effectively, producing a written report, right, a deliverable that you can market yourself with, making, right, effective oral presentations, right, of sometimes complex material. And then, you're also demonstrating, that you're working effectively as an individual, but also in collaboration with your capstone committee. So those are kind of the overarching goals. And we'll go ahead and jump into the fact that it's a bit of a unique class structure, right? So I've heard people describe it more as an independent study. I always tend to think of it as somewhat of a consulting engagement, right? Where you're doing a consulting project for a client. So with that, right, there's a little less structure in the sense of, right, no formal class meetings. There still might be some instructors that kind of offer some opportunities, right, to get together as a class and cover some kind of, topics, but it's an online class, and so you don't have that kind of regular course meeting that you do, right, with a typical course. That being said, it's important to understand that there is structure and deadlines, right? So this isn't something you go off and do entirely on your own and then come back at the end and say, hey, here it is, I'm going to present. Right, there are these very, tangible check-in points right throughout the semester, and we'll talk about some of those. And kind of structurally, the really important thing to be familiar with is the capstone committee. And this is really your kind of support network for the capstone, and really who is going to be giving you feedback throughout the semester so that the project, right, is a success and delivers value to the client. And so there's 3 people on the committee. The first reader is your instructor. So when you sign up for the course, that's your first reader. And they'll be working most closely with you, right, from a faculty perspective. The second reader is actually another faculty member from the school, and that's someone that you choose. And you might choose them because they have a specific subject matter expertise. Maybe they deal with housing, or they deal with, policing, and that's the area that your capstone is going to cover. They might also have a methodological expertise. Maybe they do qualitative methods, so they're very good at interviews and focus groups. Or maybe you're going to pick someone who, does a lot of quantitative analysis because you plan on doing regression analysis for the project. So the second reader is someone you pick. This is another case where, and you don't have to go that early, but you want to keep this in mind because people tend to serve only a certain number each semester as a second reader. And so, you might pick someone also because you know them from a past course and have a good relationship with them. But keep that in the back of your mind about selecting that second reader. In addition, the client is actually the third reader. So, whoever your client contact is, they're on your committee and they're referred to as the third reader or client. So that's the committee. It's important, and we can definitely take questions on that later. During the semester, you tend to have independent meetings, right, with each of the committee members. Second readers sometimes are very involved. Sometimes they're not very involved. And the reality is that that's, kind of a decision made, right, between you and that second reader and also the instructor. But you will meet, right, with your first reader, with your instructor, as needed throughout the semester. And of course, as Joan mentioned, you'll communicate with your client actively and meet with them as needed as well. And really the capstone itself is just defined by a set of deliverables and the ideas that they build on each other over the course of the semester so that, right, you're making progress, getting feedback, making revisions, collecting information and data, right, implementing your analysis, and then, producing these final deliverables, which are really, right, a report and a presentation. So we will walk through those a little more. There we go. So this is the main list of deliverables. And again, depending who your instructor is, things might look a little different, but this is generally what you'll experience. Beginning with a prospectus or a proposal and some forms that you submit to document who your client is and who your second reader is. And then, right, stepping through kind of a first draft, part 1 of the report, then a part 2, which is really a complete draft, and then the final report and presentation. And for MPA students, you'll also self-report which competencies were supported throughout the project, and also have your second and third readers complete evaluations of the project. And so we'll share this presentation later on, but these are all hot linked, to the actual information related to each of those. So we'll walk a little bit through the deliverables. I won't go into great detail here, but Joan already mentioned, that the student resource Canvas site houses a lot of examples and details related to the capstone, and that's true for the prospectus as well. And if you go out to the site, you can click on the new and returning students link there, and you'll end up with a list of capstone resources, including examples of past proposals and prospectus. And so really, the prospectus is that, document that is going to provide a roadmap for your project. It's not very long, but it really does set the stage for the project. And so, it's where you're presenting kind of your research question, the literature that you believe you'll be pulling from to inform the study, mentioning the methods that you think you'll be using. And, for capstones, the methods are, quite diverse. They're often surveys, interviews, quantitative analysis, benchmarking studies, these types of things. So, so this is where, that proposal is developed and laid out. And you can see from this example that's just up on the screen, there's also a timeline. So this is where you're going to kind of put a schedule, right, to the work that you're planning on doing. And your instructor, right, is going to look at this and assess the feasibility of it, and whether or not it is maybe the most effective way, right, to answer the question at hand. Or they might provide feedback about revisiting the question itself, right? So the prospectus is really important, and it kind of kicks off, right, the first deliverable within Capstone. So given these, we'll go ahead and show you, the final kind of outline of the report that you'll submit. Looks a lot like a pretty standard academic paper that you probably experienced in class. And we'll go through these in some detail, but not much here. Again, your syllabus, when you start the capstone, will have a lot more detail, right, for each of the elements of the project. There's also, references for these main sections of the report that are available, on Canvas. So, after the prospectus, the first draft is really the next deliverable. And the first draft, I always say it's just the front end of the report. So it really includes the introduction and background for the project, the literature review, which, I know everybody's experienced literature reviews in other classes, right? But, how is this project informed by things we already know, and detailing that. And then the methodology section, right, is also included in the first draft. And this is really where you're describing how you're going to collect data or information to answer your research question for your client. And so, this is kind of the plan, right, that you had in the proposal or the prospectus. And so, as you can see, it's kind of an iterative process, right? You turn these things in, you get feedback from your instructor, from your client, from your second reader, and then you kind of move on, right, based on that feedback and make edits. So the second draft is a complete draft, the probably biggest challenge with Capstone is just that a semester isn't very long. And so, when that second draft is due, it is intended to be kind of a complete draft. At times, at least in my experience, sometimes not all of the data collection has occurred or not all of the analysis has been completed. And if that's the case, then you make it as complete as you can, so that, right, your instructor can review and your client can review what you've done so far and understand where there are placeholders for things that are still, being worked on. So, so that's kind of the second complete draft. And again, we have lots of examples of these. There are Capstone reports both on the Canvas shell. There's also a digital repository with the Auraria library where we store old examples, or past examples, I should say, of capstones. And so, do spend some time looking at examples that might kind of parallel the capstone that you end up choosing, right, based on the client and the topic. And it's always helpful, right, to have that type of guidance. So with that, I'll jump to kind of the last deliverable, and that is the presentation. And, it's a required and important component. The presentation's actually, I find, pretty rewarding, right? You've got the client, you've got your second reader and your instructor there. Sometimes clients send, multiple people to attend. And, this is really a little bit of a scheduling issue, and you don't have to think about this for a long time, but you'll want to schedule it so everyone's available to attend. And these presentations, right, are typically conducted via Zoom these days for the convenience of everyone. It's usually an hour-long kind of event where the presentation, takes 15 to 20 minutes, depending on what your instructor, wants. And then there's a question and answer session with the committee members, right, where, you get to dig into the findings of your project. And so that's always, a rewarding experience, and you get a lot of good feedback. And at that point, still may make some revisions, right, to the project itself. So that's kind of the deliverables that we have. The other thing, I want to mention is just that, the capstone really is this opportunity to demonstrate, right, mastery of what you've learned throughout the program and how you've developed during your program. On the MPA side, we have our list of competencies, and all students are expected to demonstrate competency 3 and competency 5, which does relate to kind of the critical thinking and also communication and working collaboratively. So at the end of the project, you'll have forms to fill out that basically, document which of the competencies and how, right, you demonstrated them as part of the capstone experience. And it might sound a little annoying, but it's actually a nice way to have closure, when you finish the project and kind of think back about, your experience with the program. So I've got a couple, items to hit on before I get to, all these exciting secrets of Capstone and some advice. First, I do want to make people aware that there is in the MPA program a group capstone option. When we say group, we're generally talking about 2 students. But, if you have, aligned interests with a fellow student and someone you've, worked with in the past, and are interested in conducting a group capstone, that is an option. This option came about over time just because in some cases, people's projects were just larger, right, than could be done in a semester by one person. And the group option, right, allows you to go a lot deeper and do a lot more. So if you are interested in the group capstone, you need to communicate, first of all, with another individual to be a group member. And then you need to communicate with your instructor about, right, the details of that group project. And it gets a little more complicated, but it's important to, describe why the project needs to be a group process. Is the scope bigger than a normal project? Is the data collection more cumbersome? Those types of things. And then a plan for how the work will be divided, right, and shared amongst the students. But do keep that in mind. And if you have questions about the group capstone, feel free to reach out to me and I can provide more guidance. And then the last item I wanted to mention before we get into some tips for success is just reminding people that the alternative to a capstone is actually the thesis option. And, this event is about capstone, but we did just want to make sure that everybody was aware, right, that thesis is an alternative option. And it's generally of interest to students who are thinking about, pursuing additional higher education, usually a PhD program, or want to be in, kind of research intensive professions. It's a different type of work, right, than the capstone, but it also is more time consuming in that it typically requires 2 semesters of work to complete the thesis. And there are some eligibility requirements. Again, if you're interested in the thesis, feel free to reach out to myself or the advisors to talk more about that. Okay, so with that, we'll get to the part that I think most people are probably interested in, which is tips for capstone success. And we've already addressed, right, the start early, tip. And I would just add that, when the semester starts, you tend to want to have at that point in time a client and a project identified and in mind. Again, it hasn't necessarily been approved yet because you may not have communicated with your instructor before the start of the semester, but you want to have some options, right, that you can hit the ground running with the capstone process. So to me, start early means, when the semester starts, you have some options. You might still be deciding between options, but again, you don't want the semester to start and have a week or two go by where you still don't have a client and project identified, because at that point, it's just hard to catch up. So that's what start early means to me. And the other thing, and I already mentioned, definitely do, peruse some of the past capstone projects. Take a look, for those that interest you, and flip through and just get a sense of the scale and scope of a capstone project and the type of data collection that's occurring and the depth, right, of the analysis that's taking place. So that's important. Use the past experiences, right, to your benefit. As Joan mentioned, do remember it's a client-driven project. That doesn't mean you can't, kind of combine your interests with the client's needs, but make sure, right, that you are, working to support, right, their goals and what they want to get out of this. Definitely do spend time really honing your research questions and the research design along with the client. And, really a good research question makes the capstone process so much easier, because everything should map back to that research question, right? Your literature review should directly inform the research question. Your methods should directly answer the research question, the analysis, all of this, and all of your conclusions and recommendations, right, should tie back to the research question. So, as you start working through this, and identifying clients and projects, think, what is the question here? What am I trying to achieve? And that'll go a long way in supporting the project throughout the semester. I bolded this next one because it's probably the most important in my mind. You really want to manage the scope of the project. And part of this is about setting expectations with the client. And I always say under promise and over deliver. So, you get excited about these projects and you want to do everything for the client, but the reality is the semester just isn't that long. So you really do want to make sure that what you're telling them you're going to do is feasible and manageable without, too much stress on your part. And then later, if you can add, right, some other additional components that you want to do, that's wonderful, but be careful about promising too much. And, your instructor can definitely help scope the project. And many of you will hear, right, from your instructor, this is too much, pull back, right? And some of you might also hear, hey, this isn't enough, right? You need to add a little more. But scoping the project is just a really critical step there. And you want to be very thoughtful about it. The other piece, right, the results, discussion, and recommendations really are the heart of the project. And typically in the presentations, that's what's focused on. Always think, right, when you're doing the work, how's this helping the client, right? How is this going to really add value? And that tends to, if you just think about that, it tends to result in a successful project. The other thing is just communication. Don't hesitate to reach out to your capstone instructor if you're facing challenges, and communicate early. And I know Joan brought this up, but in rare instances, clients, right, have unexpected issues, right, arise during the semester. And if we know about that early on, we can help you shift, right, and help you still have a successful capstone. But you need to communicate and definitely, feel free to communicate regularly and when anything comes up. So I will say, before I move on from these tips, just one more addition. We say to start early, and we talk about identifying clients and projects, and some of you might be going, yeah, but if the class hasn't started, how do I do that, right? And this is one of the challenges. Capstone is one place where often people do reach out to an instructor before the semester starts and just say, hey, you're my instructor. I've got this option, right, for a client, and here's the project. Does this look like it's probably going to work, right? You can also reach out to someone like me, and I can give you some feedback, but I can't approve your project because your instructor is going to be the one to do that. So if you're starting really early, you kind of run into a little of a chicken and egg problem, right? Where how do you know that you can move forward with something if you don't have an instructor to approve it? But we can definitely help, at least provide some feedback on whether it seems reasonable based on our past experience. Okay. All right, so with that, the resources, we definitely just want you to feel, like you're not alone on this, because it isn't a traditional type of class where, you're with each other every week. You can feel a bit isolated, right, when you're working through the capstone. But we definitely have a lot of resources, and we've covered some of these already. As mentioned, Joan can help kind of with the finding a client piece, as can other folks and faculty members and individuals here. The Canvas site, right, is a good resource. Some of the stuff is dated, but for the most part, the usefulness is still there for all the materials that are out there. Looking at examples, like I mentioned, is important. Questions, your instructor is going to be a tremendous resource, and your classmates as well. Don't hesitate to reach out and ask your instructor to kind of facilitate, right, some ability to talk with each other, because you'll learn a lot, right, from what's working and isn't. For example, with sending out surveys or scheduling interviews, these types of things. Tools for data collection and analysis. We've got software options that are accessible remotely if that's what is needed. I bolded this just because everybody has access to the university's Qualtrics license, which comes in really, really handy when you're doing a capstone that includes any survey work. So knowing that that's there, not feeling like you have to go create something in another, free software online. This is, a really big benefit to you as students, but also during the capstone process. So I just wanted to highlight that. We also have support both on the statistics side and the writing side, just like we do with our normal classes, but for capstone. So, this is a bigger project, right, than most classes, and, probably feels like it has much higher stakes. And so working with a writing tutor and with the writing center often makes a lot of sense, right, to make it a more polished product. So with that, I will actually stop and note that we're happy to take questions now. I know we do have a panel coming up as well. And so, we can also push some of the questions off until after that to see if any of those questions are answered. So thank you all.
So I think we answered a lot of the questions in the chat, but maybe if anyone has questions, now would be a good time to pop those in the chat. Otherwise, we will have time probably from 6:15-ish in some breakout rooms. So let's just give it 1 second before we jump into the panel. So the question is the capstone graded like a normal class?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is. It's, letter grade, and, the criteria for grading will be generally consistent across sections, but you'll be graded on each of the deliverables as you work through the course, and then you'll also be assessed right by your second reader and your third reader, and that's usually incorporated into the grade as well. But yes, it is similar to that. It is letter grade, and it is considered, Dawn, you can correct me here if I'm wrong, but it's actually like a core class where I think a B- or above is required to successfully complete the course.
That's correct. Okay, well, let's maybe hold off on additional questions, but we will have time at the end. I would like to introduce Dr. Paul Taylor. He is an assistant professor here at the School of Public Affairs in our criminal justice program. Paul is going to be moderating our panel with, I think, 2 to 3 alumni who are here with us. So Paul, I'll hand it over to you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Don. And I just want to make sure we just have alumni panelists, or we have some faculty that can step in, or some clients.
So yeah, Joan, if there's client questions, Joan might be able to address that. And Todd has taught the capstone in the past, so he can definitely chime in as needed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Don. So could our alumni panelists introduce themselves briefly so we can learn a little bit more about you and find you on our Zoom screens?
Hi, I'm Alex Freeman. I graduated in May doing the MCJ and MPA dual program. I currently work at the City of Boulder as an analyst in their IT department and for Boulder PD and CU Boulder PD. And I completed my capstone with the Arvada Police Department.
Thank you, Alex.
Hey, everybody. My name is Daniel Pichardo. I graduated in May of this year. I completed the MCJ program as well. I currently work at the Colorado State Public Defender's Office. I'm a criminal defense investigator. And then I completed my capstone with the Cheyenne, Wyoming PD, and also the Cheyenne Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Do we have one more?
I'm not sure if Yesenia was able to attend.
Okay. All right. So panelists, could you just describe for me really quickly your capstone projects and what you worked on?
Yeah. So I did what kind of like a recidivism analysis. So this program, the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, is basically a tool that police officers can use to divert low-level drug offenders into this program. They work with a case manager who offers them resources such as, sometimes like housing, transportation, opportunities to find employment and stuff like that. And part of my project was analyzing the participants of that program and comparing them to a group of individuals who were arrested for the same type of offenses, but weren't given an opportunity to join the program, and just kind of compared the time to reoffense, how many times they reoffended before joining the program or before being arrested, and then after completing the program and after that initial arrest.
Fantastic. Alex, how about you?
My project focused on people experiencing homelessness in Arvada. So looking at some of the data coming from the Arvada Police Department. So they switched their record management system at the beginning of 2020. So they needed some help cleaning the data they had so that they could analyze it. I worked with 3 crime analysts there, which was a really cool just networking opportunity and mentoring as well, along with the project. And I was able to get some cool results for how not only the Arvada Police Department was interacting with those experiencing homelessness, but the Arvada community. So I think that gave some great feedback to leadership at the PD.
That's fantastic. Super relevant topics, super interesting topics. Joan, do you have any other examples of some capstones that people have worked on?
Oh gosh.
Sorry.
wasn't really prepared for that. I can tell you, I actually acted as a client last year. So we had, I worked with one of our MCJ students to do an evaluation of our career support for undergraduate students studying criminal justice.
Fantastic. So it's a broad range of topics, and really, again, it's client driven, but how did you find your client, and how did you find your project, and how did you select your committee? I know that's 3 questions in a row, but can you give us a little more detail about how you went about finding what you were going to work on and who you were going to work with for your project?
So I've been working as a crime analyst in the Denver metro area since 2019. So I actually reached out to just all the contacts I had and said, hey, I'm a student looking to do some free labor, essentially. What can I do for your department? And I got lucky that I kind of got to decide between 2 different projects. And the Arvada one was one that the crime analyst asked me, like they presented to me, essentially, that would be what they'd like for me to work on. And it was something I hadn't done in my career so far. So it was a great way to kind of round out my resume, especially with applying for jobs this past summer. And my committee, I used Dr. Hughes because it was crime analyst focused. So I don't know if they talked about before, but normally if you have a concentration, that's a really good second reader since they are going to be an expert in whatever you're focusing on.
Great. Daniel?
Yeah, so my project was, I worked as a graduate research assistant for Dr. Lonnie Shabel, and I kind of reached out to him because we were, part of the work that I did there was evaluating the lead or the law enforcement assisted diversion program in Colorado. So I reached out to him and asked him, if he had any possible contacts regarding a project. And when I was working there, we were going to do a recidivism analysis for the Colorado program, but it was going to be after I graduated and after I stopped working with him. So I kind of wanted to do that as well. So he was able to reach out to the program over in Wyoming, and he got me in contact with their project manager. So I reached out to them, kind of explained what I wanted to do. And yeah, I was able to, lucky as well, through my employment, get my client. And Dr. Shabel was also my second reader.
That's fantastic. And Alex, can you describe a little bit about how you manage that client relationship throughout the semester, maybe that communication piece and kind of the interaction during the semester as you were working on your project?
Sure. So I was really lucky, like I said, that it kind of like ended up being almost like a mentorship as well as having the client. So at my previous position, I worked Tuesday through Friday. So I actually went in person on Mondays when one of the analysts was there and kind of got to sit down, ask questions. And communication ended up being really easy because of the great access that I have. I live in Westminster, so going to Arvada was super easy. So if that's an option, I think for me, that worked really well. If it would, be an option for other people.
Thank you. Daniel, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely think communication is huge. I wasn't so lucky. I struggled a little bit with communication just because it was all the way in Wyoming, which isn't too far, but it's still like a 2-hour drive from around where I live. So that was a difficulty, as well as the program was really very new in Cheyenne. So it was new and it was small. So they really only had one person, my client, who was like really managing everything, and they were dealing with other things unrelated to my project, such as like turnover and stuff like that. So it was very difficult for them to respond to my emails and my inquiries throughout the semester. So my advice for that would be to, not obviously be pushy, but be persistent. If they don't follow back on a question within a reasonable time frame, 48 hours, usually what I gave them, sometimes 72, send a follow-up email just to remind them. Sometimes these clients have a lot on their plate, and sometimes they might see your email, but they just simply forget to respond. So never be afraid to follow up. I also relied heavily on my second reader, who had extensive knowledge on the type of project I was doing, so that really helped me out as well.
Absolutely. And I'm going to open this one up to Todd or Joan to kind of weigh in, but you've both seen a lot of capstones. Where have you seen issues between kind of the client-student interaction? Where have students run into issues with that relationship?
Yeah, great question. And I think, there's probably two places. One is the expectations that are set up front. The times that there are issues, I think, with the client dynamic is often when there's not a lot of communication during the semester, and then at the presentation, the work product, the deliverables don't match what the client thought they were going to be getting. So just making sure that you're on the same page at the beginning is really important. And I think Joan alluded to this. I mean, if you can't get the client to talk to you when you're trying to secure the project, it probably means that they're not going to be as supportive during the course of the semester and able to kind of give you guidance. And what we don't want to see and what we don't want students to have to deal with is kind of where they feel like they're making all the decisions. And of course, you are making a lot of the decisions as the capstone student, but you want to make sure the decisions you're making are supporting the goals of the client. And if you can't get the client's attention to determine what those goals are, that's the other place, you've got the problem. So yeah, communication and setting expectations and agreeing on the scope and what the project's going to deliver. I think those are probably the two main items I see with client dynamics. So, I don't know, Joan, if you have anything to add.
I think that's primarily it. It really is, people just get busy. They think they're going to have the capacity to do it. And I think part of this goes back to what Todd said earlier about limiting the scope so that, you're not asking a whole lot of the client as you're going forward. And I think if you both understand going in what the scope of that project is, it leads to a much better outcome.
That's great advice. As I've done research, I've actually rely on something that my brother taught me. My brother was a graphic designer, and he would say, the client would come in and talk to me and say, this is what I want. And just throw a lot of things on the table. Well, my brother is the expert, He's the graphic designer, and so he needs to thoroughly understand what the client wants, but he also needs to understand the limitations and what he can deliver and help guide them towards that. And so as the client gives you this and says, this is what I want, really developing a research question that can look at that, because you'll be the expert in that area, developing a research question that can look at that and can be accomplished within the scope of the time that we have is just really critically important. So I would say you have to play an active role in that process from the very beginning, is what I'm hearing from Joan and Todd very, very early on. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about the research process in your project?
Sure. The only thing for the last question too is just take that timeline seriously and be upfront with your client, because that helped me a lot too. After hearing the other responses, don't let that be something that you just kind of throw together, really think it through. In terms of the research process, I think because I've been in this field, I kind of took a very front heavy load in terms of doing a lot of data cleaning. So I spent a lot of time doing that. So my research process ended up being very quantitative. I was able to do some interviews with officers that specifically work with people who are experiencing homelessness in Nevada. But the analysis part, definitely trying to keep the scope for that, because this is like my job. It's so easy for me to go down the rabbit hole. So I really had to reel it in, and having that support with the client was super important to meeting deadlines.
It's fantastic. Daniel, do you have any thoughts on the research process for your project?
Yeah, kind of similar to what Alex was saying, a lot of my stuff was quantitative based as well. And I was doing with tens of thousands of data entries, and I really had to, like you said, hone in on what I wanted to focus on and really think realistically if it would be feasible within the time frame. Also, doing just your literature review and going through like the research that already exists can help guide you when you're a little bit stuck, or when you're looking to see whether or not something is worth looking into more and like really analyzing what, or if there's not much, research on that specific topic, that specific issue, and kind of, changing gears whenever you need to.
Sure, absolutely. Joan or Todd, can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the recommendations that organizations have taken and used from previous capstones?
That's a good one. Yeah. A lot of things blend. I would say, some capstones stand out, for addressing really big questions. And others, right, have been very focused on kind of organization level, right, policy change. And, I think back to a capstone that was done for the city of Aurora that actually was looking at whether or not it was feasible for them to become a consolidated city county. And, this is a massive question. And, the student did an amazing job of actually looking at, right, the barriers and kind of limitations. And it was something at the time that was being still considered, right, as a policy option for Aurora. And it hasn't happened. So I think the student's recommendation was actually correct, that the barriers were just too high. But that's the type of example, right? Kind of the big picture question for an organization. Others, I think we see a lot of kind of process improvement, and change, largely through kind of benchmarking studies, right, that look at peers and how they do things, and then make recommendations for how, right, they can kind of adopt whatever the best practice or promising practice is. And I appreciate your question. And I would just like to mention, Alex and Daniel, and I think a lot of the MCJ students do a lot of, kind of statistical analysis and quantitative oriented projects, and MPA students do too. But, we definitely see a lot, and I would say probably more likely to see qualitative projects, leaning on those interviews or surveys that, with open-ended responses, these types of things. And I would just note one of the hard parts is knowing how much is enough, right, for data collection. And, if you have a secondary data set that has, tens of thousands of records, you kind of know, right, that's your data set. If you're doing interviews, it's a really tough question. And many of you might ask your instructor, how many interviews is enough, right? And that's like, it's a really hard question to answer, but your instructor should be able to give you some guidance about how you know when you've done enough interviews, right? When there's saturation, you're starting to hear the same responses. But also we know that it takes a lot of time and effort to set up interviews and conduct interviews. And so, right, there probably are some numbers in the head of your instructor where, X number of interviews is enough, right? Like for a capstone project, given the time constraints. Surveys are even harder at times because you never know what you're going to get, right? As far as the responses go. And instructors might not like this when I'm a second reader, but often I tell, students to just think about having a plan B. If you're counting on doing surveys and you distribute the survey through email and you get 10 responses or 5 responses, right? Despite your best efforts, what do you do, right? How do you react to that? And then maybe you do shift to interviews, right? That can kind of complement, right, those survey responses that you receive. So, the be flexible thing that Joan mentioned, I think, it is important, and sometimes things don't work out as planned. And so you just always want to be thinking a little, one step ahead. So if this doesn't pan out exactly as I designed, how can I still do a meaningful project that's going to satisfy my client and my instructor? And in most cases, you can still do it, right, successfully, but it's just a matter of, a little bit of forethought, for contingencies like that. So Paul, I know I didn't really answer your question entirely, but hopefully that's still helpful.
And I think it's a really important point. And other than Todd's research, I just want to put out there, there's no such thing as perfect research. It doesn't exist. And so I think as an instructor, what's important for me to see is that you understand the limitations of your own research, that you're able to articulate that. And that to me demonstrates a tremendous amount. If you set out to interview 30 people, and we'll just throw a random number out there, and you interview 15 people, and then it ends up being that's all that you could do within that time frame, be able to articulate what the limitations of this is and what you are able to say with this data and what you're not able to say. And that really demonstrates to me that you understand the research methods that you're using, that you understand the research process, and that you understand the limitations of what it is that you're doing, because none of us can conduct perfect research other than Todd.
If I can just jump in, I just want to throw out a reminder that a lot of our clients are very small nonprofits. And so they really rely on this, and they come back to us year after year because they do rely on that student on these projects to help them with strategy, with benchmarking, with analysis. I mean, they're running on a true can't say those words together, shoestring, and your impact on their organizations, I can't emphasize how invaluable it is.
Fantastic. So you we'll go back to Alex and Daniel. You conducted your research, you collected all this great data, you analyzed it. Did you run into any challenges as you were trying to develop your recommendations based on the data that you collected?
I think when I looked back at what I did for my capstone undergrad, having no work experience, I realized I didn't really know what I was talking about. So it was very actually like relieving this, like I could give them something that I knew what I was talking about, and that I didn't want it to be overly academic. Saying you need to build 3 new homeless shelters in Arvada, like with funding, it was just not always going to happen. So I tried to give kind of one big picture, but really think about what could practically be done by someone in this role. So for me, it was actually, I think, helpful to just have better perspective. And I think for a lot of people that are going to be doing it, they'll have that perspective as well.
Daniel, how about you? Thank you, Alex.
I think for me, one of the challenges that I ran into is that the results weren't what I was expecting. And the results weren't, I guess you could say, favorable to the client in terms of like, oh, wow, look, your program's working. The results didn't show that the program wasn't not working, but they just showed statistically that there was no significant difference between being a participant to the program and not being a participant. So I had been doing all this work during graduate school, working with the LEAD program in Colorado, and to see it not work in a different place, I was just a little bit surprised. So I had to work with, okay, well, what can be done to improve the program, to maybe for the next time that you conduct a similar project, there's significant differences between in terms of recidivism between participants and non-participants. So for me, it was just kind of figuring out the different ways that I could provide them with recommendations that would benefit them for future research.
Some really, really important points. And I'm going to go back to first what Alex said really quickly. And I just want to reiterate something: using common everyday language. Man, so important in your proposal or in your final product that you're presenting to the client. When you're presenting, you want to be able to show a depth of knowledge and an understanding of research methods, but that doesn't mean you have to use that terminology. And so I think that's just critically important, and that's great. Daniel, what you're saying, a null result is an important result, right? If you don't find what you think you were going to find, that tells me you're a good researcher, right? You're going in with an open mind, you're curious, and that's fantastic. But it's okay if your hypothesis is not supported. In fact, it's really important information. It may not be the information that your client wanted even, but it's important information. And then how you present that is going to be really, really important in your recommendation. And so I'm really glad we kind of uncovered those things. Todd, you were writing something down. Did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, these are great points. You'll often hear, I think, capstone instructors say students kind of have two competing masters, and it's, the academic side of the project, right? And then the client side. And, most of us, I think, really feel like in the end, right, is the client satisfied, or, are they getting what they had hoped for? But I just showed you that big long list of sections right in the report. And honestly, it's not the friendliest format, for policymakers and right people who work in the field, administrators. And so often that's a challenge, right? And I think we understand that, but you'll also find that some instructors will ask for, maybe a supplementary document that's really just an executive summary, right? Or, a presentation that you would make to the board, right, of the organization, really that, just synthesizes everything to the most important, information. And so keep in mind that those can also be deliverables, right? So maybe your report's the deliverable and the analysis, but it might also be an infographic that actually tells the story of what you found, or some other type of work product. So do keep that in mind. The other thing, which Daniel's point really brought up, just a reminder that, you might love this organization you're working for, you might, be really invested in what they do, but your role here is really not as an advocate, right? It's really to be impartial and to basically be that third party, right, that can answer a question for the client, right, without any of the biases that the people who work for the organization probably have, right? So keeping that in mind, I think is also very important. But Alex and Daniel, yeah, your feedback is really, really helpful.
Yeah, it was great. We couldn't have selected two better people. This is fantastic. I'm going to go back to you really quickly, Todd. What is the difference between a good capstone and a great capstone?
Let's see. Yeah, I think probably what makes a great capstone is the impact. And honestly, not every capstone can guarantee that. A good capstone is one that really, delivers on what the client wanted and needed. There's nothing better than being in those presentations when, the client says, this is exactly what we needed, right? And they're so happy to have the information. And sometimes that just means that, hey, we need to do 3 more capstone projects to actually learn more, but it starts the ball rolling, right? So I think a good capstone is one that really does satisfy the client, right? And also kind of manages, right, the process of the capstone successfully, right, without being too demanding of the client, but also communicating enough, right, finding that middle ground that's right for the client experience. The great ones, right? I mean, I think really the step up is when it's contributing knowledge beyond maybe just that project, or really making, a tangible difference, right, for whatever the question was or whatever the space was. So it's a fine line, and you don't have all the control over good to great, but a good project goes a long way, and people should feel really positive, the amount of work you do. And what you can accomplish in such a short time period. So I'd say they're all good and great shades of that, but that impact, right, is really exciting to see, in certain projects.
Thank you so much. All right, Daniel, did you experience any personal, communication, political, or ethical conflicts during your project? And if you did, how'd you work through them?
I wouldn't say I did, to be honest. The only issues were the communication issues that I discussed, as well as, these high expectations or these things that were not feasible within the time frame that we had. I think it's important to really sit down before you start the project and sit down and talk with your client for an hour or however long you have and really lay down everything that you want to do and make sure that you guys are on the same page. I did get like requests to do, hey, maybe you should do this. And I'm like, well, the project is due in a month, so I don't have time to go do all of that. But kind of like, I believe it was Todd who said it earlier, kind of under promise, over deliver. So I was able to be like, okay, you know what, like I'll take that into consideration. If I can get through this key part that we discussed, I'll look into it as well. And ultimately I was able to get portions of that into my final project, which they were impressed with, which helped, but I didn't promise it beforehand because I didn't want to overwork myself or, leave them, I guess, disappointed if I didn't do it. So just don't be afraid to, to speak up and just respectfully explain to them the limitations that you have and work with what you are able to do. Just don't overpromise.
A great research project is going to lead to more research projects. And so that can be part of your recommendations, and it might even get you hired. So there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with leaving more or finding more questions that need to be answered. In fact, that's probably a benchmark of good research, is that we develop more questions from your research. Alex, any issues or conflicts that you ran into?
I don't think so. Like I said, was really lucky, and I think it was hard at some point for me not compare my project to other people in the class. Not that you're talking about that too much, but like I said, mine was really front heavy, and I was worried that maybe I hadn't done enough. So I really had to make sure I was communicating with the teacher, with Dr. Gover, and she kind of gave me a reality check of some people hadn't even gotten data back from their survey. And then I realized, oh, I'm actually in a good place. So I think that communication with the professor you have is just going to be really important to make sure that you are giving yourself perspective and not maybe stressing about something that you don't need to.
Fantastic. Great advice. Okay. So I think we have a couple of questions coming in, but I have one final question for our panelists. Do you have any last minute tips or things that people should avoid as they go into this capstone adventure?
This is something the professor will say when you start class, and I heard it, but I didn't really apparently absorb it. But just be upfront about what data you're going to be working with. I kind of took on a pseudo internship, which career-wise wasn't the worst thing, but I was doing 8 to 10 hour days on top of my 40-hour job, cleaning data for probably 2 months. Don't do that. Again, I ended up with a really great product, but I think because maybe I've been in the field, I kind of got maybe a bigger project than another student might have got. So just be really upfront. If you say I have 4 hours a week to dedicate, make sure the client knows that, so that the work you have, the project, the scope, everything fits within that.
That's great. Daniel?
Yeah, kind of touching on what Alex said, definitely manage your priorities. I was working my job. I was also doing an internship, and on top of, trying to complete the capstone project. So just be realistic with everything. And I know sometimes it's difficult when you work a full-time job to be able to manage all that, but really going into my next tip is set intermediate deadlines throughout the semester. So don't just focus on that big deadline for the first draft. Try to set deadlines for yourself before the first draft is due. So maybe 1 week you want to get done on the introduction portion. Another week you want to get done on the literature review portion. Kind of these little deadlines to give yourself room to breathe and the ability to not feel like you're overworking yourself and overstressing yourself. And then lastly, just really, if you can, just try to pick something that you're really passionate about and that you really want to learn about. I was really passionate about working with these individuals who suffer from substance use disorders, who oftentimes are indigent and can't afford like treatment, or can't afford to, be put in jail because they'll lose their job, which is like what they're depending on. Ultimately, it worked out for me. As you were saying, I got offered a position with the organization that I did the did the project for and ultimately went a different route, but it still really opened up a lot of doors for me. And I feel like the Capstone project really influenced that and was just like a really good thing to add to my resume.
Thank you so much for that. Todd, do you have anything to add as we kind of wrap up the panel and maybe go into some questions from everyone else?
Yeah, no, I think that was great. Great advice. Yeah, we can go ahead and do questions if you want.
Sounds good. Joan or Don, do you want me to manage the questions as they come in, or would you like to do that?
I'll go ahead and read them maybe,
Okay.
and then give me 1 second. Oh, this is about the event. Let me see. Give me 1 second. I'm having technical difficulties.
We can jump in, Don. We've got the questions at the end here if you want.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah. So yeah, Britton had asked the panelists about how many hours a student spends working on the Capstone project each week of the semester, which is a really good question. I mean, I think technically it should be somewhat equivalent to, a course, right? That you would be doing. So, and of course, you don't have your assigned readings. You don't have, the different assignments of a normal class. You also don't have the in-class time, that you would be dedicating. So I would say in theory, it's equivalent, right, to a normal class and the burden, the time burden you should have. But because, right, you're starting a little early, you've got to identify a client and a project, right? There's some additional out of class time, right, in doing that. And then, of course, it's very up and down, I think. When you are collecting your data, it might require, right, more time for those weeks than it did for doing the lit review and the prospectus and those types of front end tasks. You might end up, right, with kind of a crunch time to, where you have to do the analysis. And so you might end up putting in more. And I should know because it's in my syllabus, the number of hours per week that's expected for a 3-credit class, but I actually can't remember the number right now. But it's probably on par, but on the higher end, right, of the burden and the demands, I would say. And again, it depends on kind of the scope of your project and how much original data collection's occurring or data cleaning like Alex had that, you just have to get done, right, in order to kind of complete it. So I don't know if anyone else can jump in with more specifics.
I would say the only thing to add on to that, just to reiterate what you're saying, is at least the work you're doing is going towards a really great final project that will be great for your resume. There's no discussion boards or the reading, some other things that might take up time in other classes. And I think what Daniel said about the deadlines, as long as you're working up to the different drafts, it's much more manageable than trying to do, 5 of those 8 sections in a weekend. Don't do that to yourself.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, there is logic to our rules around being done with all your core classes, right, before you take Capstone. And we definitely strongly recommend, where possible, just doing Capstone as your only class. There are instances where people, right, are taking an elective alongside the Capstone. And, some people are successful in doing that, but that just adds kind of some constraints, right, on time, where now, you might be working and taking an elective and doing your Capstone. And, the pressure then can build on the Capstone side, right, if you have another class that you're thinking about and spending time on. So I know the options aren't always there, but if possible, it's nice to just be focusing on Capstone in addition to life, right?
Yeah, I would say it's very difficult to really put like a hard number on how many hours you work on it. There was times where I would work on a portion of it for maybe like just an hour or two just to write up some final parts. There was other days where I was in a zone and I was doing data analysis and I would spend 7 hours, a whole day almost just, tugging through those tough things, but really setting those deadlines is going to be the key to like having you not overwork yourself and overwhelm yourself. So I'm going to keep, pushing that portion of it, is just really focus on setting these intermediate deadlines, and it'll feel much less difficult. Because I know those days where I was working on it 8 to 9 hours, it was my own decision, obviously, and I wasn't because I was behind. It's just because sometimes you just get really into your work, and you spend the whole day working on it.
I would just add, it's different than a lot of the work that you've done to this point, and you're kind of generating rather than regenerating to a large degree, and that's different. It's a different process, so you have to give yourself space and time to think and to write and to read and to be engaged with your topic. And the sooner you can do that in the process and kind of start setting yourself up. I mean, maybe you just say Tuesdays, it's my writing day. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have an opportunity to do some writing. And you have some time to engage kind of deeply with your topic and what it is that you're doing. I think you'll find that benefits you, whether you're doing the analysis or you're actually writing up your report. Setting aside that time for yourself, making that time somewhat sacred, turning off that cell phone, turning on, engaging with your work can be a really good way to generate. And rather than kind of this regenerative process that most of us are engaged in through our academic career. So another question for the students. So Todd, we're not allowed to weigh in on this. Did you feel supported in completing sections of your paper by the first reader, or did you feel like you had to figure it out alone or be more independent?
I would say, I feel like I got great feedback from all 3 of the readers. The first reader, being the teacher, I felt like, she gave some really good edits. The second reader definitely felt like I really trusted her judgment of diving into the specific area that I was focused on. And then my client actually gave a lot of really good feedback. I mean, every page was marked, which obviously is overwhelming when you get it, but it was great because it made a really good final product. So I never felt alone. I feel like there was a lot of support.
Yeah, just to add to that too, my first reader, my professor, she was very good on checking in on students. Almost every week or every couple of weeks, she would send an email, hey, how are you doing? How's the project going? Do you have any questions? Do you have anything that you're stuck on? And so that was really helpful. As well as my second reader too, someone who I really trusted and someone who really helped me out too. I would have this draft ready to go, feeling like it was some of my greatest work, and it would come back and it was just marked up all over. But ultimately, it was very beneficial to me. I would go back, read through the feedback, and make those changes, and I think that really helped me have a really good capstone project in the end.
Great. Anything else we're seeing? I'm not seeing other questions. Oh,
yeah.
Success rate.
Yeah,
that's an important question. Yeah, I think it's only a 30% pass rate, right, Todd? No.
Yeah, in a good year. Yeah, no. Yeah, great question. Just asking how well students generally do with this, and are there instances where people don't successfully finish capstone? Yes. Is it usually because of something that's somewhat idiosyncratic, related to the client, the project just becoming infeasible for reasons that couldn't have been perceived? That's usually the reason. What I would say as an instructor, and it's hard being an instructor for capstone, so give them a break at times at least. If early on the instructor doesn't see a path to successfully finishing the capstone, then they're probably going to talk to you about maybe putting it off until the next semester. So in most cases, I think we avoid unsuccessful outcomes in capstone because students will withdraw from the class, in the first couple of weeks if it doesn't feel like things are on track at that point. And honestly, students shouldn't feel like that's a failure. The timing didn't work, the project opportunities didn't align. But if we're going down that path, we'd much rather have a student withdraw and regroup, right? And then be on top of it for the next semester than, right, be put in a position where it's just really hard to catch up and finish. And, the reality is, the amount of weeks you have where you're really working on the project itself, it's probably 10 weeks. And that's just not a lot of time. And so if you come into it not ready to get started, and have options to pursue, it just makes it harder. So great question about success rates. I'd say the vast majority are successful and do well. There's rare instances where something kind of blows up, right? And if that happens, right, that's where you're communicating with your instructor so that the outcome isn't a failure. It's, hey, let's regroup and figure out how to get back on track, right, for the future and get you finished and a meaningful capstone experience. So, and I don't know if Dawn has anything to add with that, but.
Yeah, I mean, it happens in very rare instances, and you do have the opportunity to take it again. Incompletes are not given in Capstone, so it's typically a withdraw. And I think, instructors try to be really aware of making those decisions as early as possible if things just don't go as planned. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's not the most upbeat question to end on, but I hope that reassures people.
Yeah,
that the process is set up for you to succeed. In all the elements, and that's not to say it isn't stressful. Given the time constraints and that it is a capstone experience, but definitely remember that we're all here to support you, and your instructor is there to support you, and the client is definitely there to support you. So. Really, if issues arise, talk to us and we'll figure out a path forward.
Any last questions for our panelists, Alex and Daniel? Yay! And so thank you so much for spending your Friday evening with us. And it's so great to see your faces, and it's nice as an advisor to hear how the capstone actually went. Paul, thank you so much for moderating too.
Of course. Thank our panelists. They were fantastic.
They were fantastic. As a reminder, everybody, I will be sending out a recording of this event with all the slide decks, links to the Auraria Library repository, the online capstone brochure for potential clients that you may want to share, and just additional resources probably in the next 2 weeks. So be looking for that. And we will, Joan and Todd, did you want to stay on in case students have additional questions?
Sure, I can stick around if anyone has, those specific questions that they didn't want to ask through the chat.
Sure, same.
But we hope this event was helpful, kind of gives you some grounding, lets you know what to expect, but we are here to support you. You're in the home stretch, and we're not going to leave your side. So thanks so much for coming. If you have questions, please stay on.
Good afternoon. This is Christina Henlon. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you so much. This was such a great presentation. Really appreciate all of your time today on a Friday. Appreciate it. And my question is, if we connect with a client and they'd like information in general about the capstone, I'm sure we can send them some of the materials that have been offered today. And if they wanted to talk with anyone in the advising team or a faculty member, who would we point them to?
You can send them my way, Christina.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. And then if I have questions they can't answer, I will send them Todd's way.
That works.
That sounds so good.
Yeah, good question, Christina.
Sounds so good. I'm in the executive MPA program doing environmental, and so I'm hoping to find a capstone related to water management. So I'll let you all know how that goes.
Excellent. Yeah, and I've been on some capstones kind of in the water space, and like Western Governors Association, there are some clients that you might not naturally think of in the water space, but are definitely dealing with water issues. So, and this might be a good one too to reach out to some faculty on. So feel free to check in if you're having any obstacles in coming up with ideas. So.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Looks like we have a few students still on the line. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question for us.
And if you have kind of one-on-one questions that you want to have answered, we can always stick you in a breakout room with one of us if that's the case. These are just the people who fell asleep, right?
All right, guys. Well, I think I'm going to call it. Maybe I'll give it just another couple seconds. Alex and Daniel, so impressed.
Yeah, that was great.
Awesome.
This is really great.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, seriously, like one of the best alumni panels we've had. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you said it to everyone. Okay.
No.
At the end, you're like, you guys really blew it, actually.
You guys were the worst.
Your answers couldn't have been more incorrect.
No, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really raised, I think, all the important issues. So it's great.
We'll just keep inviting you back. That's what you get.
I was gonna say, if you need me next semester, let me know.
Yeah, we're like, we graduated 8 years ago.
Well, now we've got the video, so we can just keep reusing it. Right? just no live questions.
Yeah, exactly.
I have one more question. This is Christina.
Yeah.
So when the client is determining what they like the student to work on for client project, is there criteria for what CU Denver is looking for with regard to, the level of detail of a project, where CU Denver, might reject a project that a client proposes, or that a client should formulate a project around that criteria so that it's rigorous enough to count?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there are no criteria that guide it. And so it's really going to come down to your instructor's judgment. In most cases, the problem is that there's too much, right, to the project. It's too sophisticated or too complicated, right, for the time period. In the cases when I was instructor and someone brought a project and there just wasn't a lot of meat on the bones, right? Like, it just wasn't enough there for the student to demonstrate their competencies, right? And, really showcase kind of what they learned. As an instructor, I would say if that's what the client wants, that's what the client wants. But then let's add on some stuff, right? So before, where I was saying manage the scope and under promise, in those cases, you would maybe add some things. So say they just wanted some data analysis that wasn't really all that complicated. Maybe you broaden the scope, right, to also do some qualitative work and do some interviews, right, that'll supplement whatever findings you have from, the quantitative data that maybe were already available and they weren't asking you to do that much with it. So how can you kind of go beyond, right, what they asked for and bring additional value to the client, but also, right, serve, to fulfill, right, the kind of expectations with the project. So short answer, there's no list of that, right? No criteria, but your instructor, it's kind of in their head, right? When they look at a proposal about whether or not this is substantial enough to satisfy, right, the demonstration of the competencies that we expect for the capstone.
And if sometimes if projects come in and I will recognize that they don't meet kind of our criteria for a capstone. And so I will just proactively reach out to the client and say, can you make this, this is what the capstone needs to have in it. This doesn't quite have it. Or would you like to make this an internship? Because sometimes they actually just want someone to do the work and not the research. So I try to catch those if they come in, but obviously I don't see every project. So if you've got questions, I would say ask your instructor for sure.
Okay, so it should be research based as opposed to doing a part of a project they're working on.
Yes, technically, and it's a great question though, because often, right, there's a blurred line there. So, for example, right, a client might want a student to basically develop a website for them. That's probably not a great example, but so that's more doing something. For that to be a capstone, right? Maybe it's a peer benchmarking project where you look to see what the websites, right, of similar organizations entail, and then look to the literature for kind of effective, right, internet presence, and then maybe, right, that website piece is considered a part of the project and a deliverable, that results from it. But yes, generally, this will include some original data collection and analysis. And sometimes secondary data is used, so there's not really data collection. Then the analysis becomes more sophisticated, right, in dealing with that. So.
Okay, that helps a lot.
The question. Yeah. But we do see that sometimes, right, where it's more people are like, oh, they want me to do this rather than answer a question, and often you can craft that into something that'll work for the capstone and still satisfy the do part, right, of the request. So.
Great.
Okay, you guys. Appreciate your support. Christina, it was so great to hear from you.
Great to hear your voice too.
I think that's it, you guys.
All right. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Ellen. You rock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen.
Great job, guys. Happy to be here.
Bye, Ben.